In the unforgiving heartland, where shadows stretch long and whispers carry weight, a new legend is about to be told. Before the truth unfolds, offer your tribute. If you believe in the triumph of the unseen and the power of a single glance, show your support with a like. Join our community by subscribing, so you won't miss the secrets buried in the human heart. Now, prepare yourselves for a journey into the hidden depths of justice. The world began for Finn as a cold breath, a biting wind that scraped across the plains of a small Montana town, even in the false promise of an early spring. Every morning was a canvas of muted grays and whites, fog clinging to the frosted storefronts of Harmony Creek, making the familiar unfamiliar, isolating each building, each person, within its own damp shroud. He moved through it like a ghost, his worn sneakers scuffing softly on the cracked pavement, a sound only he ever heard, a whisper against the indifferent asphalt. Sometimes, the worst moments of our lives are just the universe preparing us for who we're meant to become. And for Finn, the worst moments were an everyday ritual, a silent testament to a life lived on the fringes, a life meticulously sculpted by forces unseen and uncaring. The very air felt laden with unspoken narratives, secrets that suffocated the weak and elevated the ruthless. His breath plumed in front of him, thick and white, then vanished into the vast, indifferent expanse of the morning. His hands, chapped and reddened from the cold, dove without hesitation into the yawning maw of an alley dumpster behind Henderson's general store. The stench was a familiar companion, rotting produce, stale coffee grounds, the metallic tang of something unidentifiable, all conspiring in a symphony of decay. Most people held their breath, hurried past, wrinkling their noses in disgust, their hurried steps a denial of the rot lurking just beyond their manicured perceptions. Finn barely registered it. His focus was a singular, unwavering beam. Survival. He was searching for anything, a discarded banana still firm enough to eat, a bent can of soup, even cardboard to insulate the drafts in their dilapidated trailer at the edge of town. His very existence was an act of subversion against the planned obsolescence of a society that discarded people as readily as packaging. He knew the roots, the prime times, the rhythm of the town's refuse, a secret language he had learned in the shadows. Mr. Henderson, with his clean apron and forced cheer, tossed out fresh-baked goods if they were a day old, often still warm. Finn learned that if you got there before sunrise, you could sometimes claim them before the raccoons or the other, more desperate scavengers did, each morning a silent, cutthroat competition for scraps. Today, only crumpled paper and empty packaging awaited him, a hollow echo of unfulfilled promise. A familiar tightening in his gut, not hunger, not yet, but the cold tendril of worry for his mother, a worry that coiled in his stomach, sharp and relentless. He glanced at the distant mountains, their peaks still veiled in mist, silent giants indifferent to his plight, yet somehow, he felt a deeper connection to their rugged, unyielding nature than to the fickle, polished surfaces of Harmony Creek. He was an extension of this harsh land, learning its brutal lessons of endurance. Elara was everything to Finn, the fragile anchor in a tempest. Her cough, a dry rasp that tore through the thin walls of their home, was the soundtrack to his life, a constant, gnawing counterpoint to the hollow silence of their poverty. She was fading, he knew, like an old photograph left in the sun, her once vibrant eyes now perpetually shadowed, her skin a translucent parchment stretched taut over brittle bones. The medicine, when they could afford it, only offered fleeting respite, a temporary truce in a war their bodies were losing. They needed more, better. But better cost money, and money was a currency Finn didn't understand how to earn in this town, a town where every opportunity seemed locked behind an invisible barrier, guarded by an unseen hand. People didn't know his name. They knew him as the garbage kid, a silent figure, a shadow, an inconvenient truth of poverty lurking just beyond the polished veneer of Main Street. He was the shame they preferred not to acknowledge, the broken reflection they quickly turned away from, a flaw in their carefully constructed illusion of prosperity. Yet he wasn't a thief. He wasn't a criminal. He was a son, and he was trying to keep his mother alive, to coax another breath from her fading lungs, another fragile smile to her lips. Every discarded scrap, every hidden find, was a tiny victory against a relentless tide, a small act of defiance against the crushing weight of their circumstances. His invisibility was a cloak, protecting him from their pity and their judgment, but it also isolated him, making him a stranger in the only world he had ever known. A quiet, burning resentment lived deep within him, not for the people who ignored him, but for the insidious, systemic forces that had forced them into this unseen existence, this perpetual struggle. His world was small, defined by the rim of trash cans and the ever-present ache in his mother's chest. He was just a boy, but he carried the weight of a man and the burden of a forgotten legacy. A sharp clatter echoed in the alley as a gust of wind knocked over a loose bin lid. Finn froze, his senses honed by countless mornings of avoiding unwanted attention. He quickly scanned the alley, his eyes darting through the shifting gloom, but it was empty, save for the dancing dust motes in the faint morning light. He resumed his search, meticulously sifting through the layers of the town's forgotten things, each item a discarded fragment of someone else's comfortable life. He found a half-eaten bagel, cold and slightly stale, but edible, a small victory in a world of defeats. A small, almost imperceptible nod of satisfaction, a tightening of his resolve. This would go to Elara. She needed the strength. He carefully wrapped it in a clean piece of newspaper he'd salvaged earlier and tucked it into his threadbare backpack, alongside an old, bent children's book he'd found yesterday, its pages water-stained but still readable. He had promised his mother he'd read to her tonight. It was a small comfort, a fragile thread of normalcy in their precarious lives, a whispered defiance against the encroaching despair. The fog began to lift, revealing the harsh, angular lines of the mountains in the distance, indifferent sentinels watching over the small dramas of Harmony Creek, their granite faces holding secrets older than any human sorrow. Finn knew he was just a speck, a forgotten detail in their grand tableau, but he also knew that even a speck could hold a universe of love and desperation, and a burning, unshakable will. As the sun's pale light touched the peaks, a fleeting image flickered in Finn's mind, a weathered photograph Elara kept hidden, of a sprawling, fertile land, an old farmhouse beneath an impossibly vast sky. The Vance homestead, she'd called it, her voice thick with a longing he couldn't quite understand, a place that felt more like a myth than a memory. It was their legacy, she'd said, stolen by unseen hands, a truth that now more than ever resonated with a chilling clarity. The sun, a pale, anemic disk, was barely peeking over the eastern ridge when Finn heard it, a sudden, sharp cry from inside Henderson's general store. It wasn't the usual cheerful greeting of early customers, the polite rustle of morning commerce. It was shrill, laced with panic, a sound that ripped through the quiet morning like a torn cloth. He instinctively hunched lower, pulling his hoodie tighter, hoping the alley's shadows would continue to swallow him whole, to render him utterly invisible. He hated attention, especially the kind that came with raised voices, with the implicit threat of being seen and judged. He was almost done anyway, his backpack a little heavier, his small victory secured, the stale bagel a fragile promise for Elara. He started to slip away, moving with the practiced ease of someone who didn't want to be noticed, a phantom in the early light, when the door to the store burst open. Mr. Henderson, his face contorted in a mask of distress, stood framed in the doorway, scanning the street frantically. His eyes, usually crinkling in a practiced, condescending smile, were wide with accusation, darting with a predatory speed. They landed on Finn, a flicker of something dark and immediate passing through them, not recognition but instantaneous, self-serving judgment. It was a look Finn knew well, a silent branding that condemned him before a word was ever spoken, a narrative already written by the privileged. "My phone, it's gone," Mr. Henderson wailed, his voice carrying clearly on the crisp morning air, echoing with self-pity and manufactured outrage. "My new smartphone, I just put it down for a second." He wrung his hands, his gaze still fixed on Finn, as if the boy's presence was proof enough of guilt. Finn froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic percussion in the stillness. He had seen nothing, heard nothing, other than the usual morning quiet and Mr. Henderson's sudden outburst. But he knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the accusation was already being formed in the minds of anyone within earshot, a silent, insidious conspiracy. He was the garbage kid. He was always around. He was the easiest target, the convenient scapegoat upon whom the town could project its own unspoken discomforts. There are truths that only reveal themselves when everything we know falls apart. And for Finn, the truth of his vulnerability, his powerlessness, the ease with which his life could be shattered, was about to tear his world apart. The mountains, now fully revealed, seemed to watch with cold, immutable eyes, guardians of a landscape where justice was often as scarce as rain. Sheriff Brody, a burly man whose uniform always seemed a size too small for his expansive frame, arrived minutes later, his patrol cruiser lights flashing a muted blue against the still-present fog, a theatrical display of authority. He listened to Mr. Henderson's frantic explanation with a practiced, weary expression, his gaze occasionally drifting to the alley where Finn still stood, unmoving, a statue carved from injustice. Finn had never run from anything in his life. Running implied guilt, and he had none. He had only ever searched, scavenged, survived. Now the weight of the town's collective suspicion felt like a physical force, pressing him down, making his chest ache, a heavy stone of unspoken condemnation. The silent judgment of Harmony Creek was a suffocating blanket, woven from prejudice and fear. "I just saw him back there, Sheriff." Mr. Henderson pointed a trembling finger at Finn, his voice a whine of manufactured indignation. "The garbage kid. He's always rooting around. Always." He said it with the certainty of a man who believed his words were gospel, his social standing an unassailable shield. Sheriff Brody's eyes, usually a flat, unexpressive gray, narrowed. He slowly approached Finn, his heavy boots echoing on the pavement, each step a declaration of impending doom. "You, boy, what's your name?" he barked, his voice thick with an assumed authority that brooked no argument. Finn swallowed, his throat dry, a desert within him. He hadn't heard his name spoken by an adult, outside of his mother, in years, and to hear it now, imbued with such suspicion, felt like a desecration. "Finn," he croaked, barely audible, a fragile sound against the cold morning. "Finn," the sheriff repeated, a hint of disdain in his tone, as if the name itself was an inconvenience. "Mr. Henderson says you were lurking around the back door. Says his phone went missing." "I didn't take anything," Finn said, his voice stronger now, fueled by a fierce, protective defiance that surprised even himself. "I was just looking for food." Sheriff Brody scoffed, a short, dismissive sound that was louder than any verbal accusation. "Food, or something more valuable," he gestured to Finn's backpack, his eyes glinting with a self-satisfied certainty. "Let's see what's in there." Finn clutched the straps tighter, his knuckles white. "It's just my stuff, for my mom." The words were a plea, a desperate shield around the last vestiges of their dignity. "Hand it over, kid," the sheriff's voice hardened, no longer a question but an order, an unyielding decree from the embodiment of the system. Reluctantly, Finn unzipped his worn bag, the zipper a harsh rasp in the silence. The sheriff peered inside, his nose wrinkling at the sight of the stale bagel wrapped in newspaper, the water-stained book, a few other meager finds. A bent spoon, a handful of smooth river stones Finn had collected. No shiny smartphone, just the desperate scraps of a desperate life laid bare for judgment. "See?" "Nothing," Finn said, his gaze unwavering, meeting the sheriff's cynical eyes, a silent challenge in his defiance. Sheriff Brody sighed, a theatrical puff of air that spoke of practiced annoyance. "Convenient, isn't it? No phone. But the phone's gone, and you're the only one around who had reason to be sneaking. Easy pickings for someone like you. He didn't have proof. He didn't need it. The narrative was already written. The poor kid, the easy scapegoat, the predictable villain in Harmony Creek's pristine story. The collective whispers of the unseen town had already condemned him. But I didn't, Finn started, his voice cracking, but the sheriff cut him off with a dismissive wave. Tell it to the judge, kid. You're coming with me. The handcuffs were cold, metallic manacles around his small wrists, too big for him, yet impossibly tight, biting into his skin. The click echoed in the morning stillness, a definitive damning sound sealing his fate. His world, already precarious, tilted violently, plunging him into an abyss of despair. He was arrested without evidence, charged quickly, the paperwork replacing truth, replacing his story, replacing his humanity. The system, relentless and impersonal, had already decided his fate, punishing the weak first, always first, an unseen current dragging him under. Shame, thick and bitter, washed over him, not for what he had done, but for the indignity of being seen this way, a criminal when all he had ever been was a survivor, a quiet warrior for his mother. He glanced back at the alley, at the forgotten dumpsters, the scene of his quiet daily struggle. Now, even that sanctuary was tainted, poisoned by the town's prejudice. His gaze drifted to the distant mountains, their peaks now sharp and clear in the emerging light. They offered no comfort, only the stark, indifferent beauty of a world that didn't care about a garbage kid, a world that was conspiring to erase him. He had sought merely to survive, but the system demanded more, demanding not just his suffering, but his silence, his submission. He would not give it. The small-town courthouse was a relic, a two-story brick building from the early 20th century, squat and imposing, with a facade that boasted chipped paint and a grand, albeit faded, sense of authority. Inside, it was no less intimidating, a labyrinth of dim corridors and echoing chambers. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and something vaguely metallic, perhaps the lingering ghost of countless fears and anxieties, a silent testament to the lives it had judged and broken. The courtroom itself felt less like a place of justice and more like a stage for judgment, a theater where predetermined narratives played out. High ceilings dwarfed the already small space, making the people within feel insignificant, reduced to mere cogs in a larger, unfeeling machine. The benches were hard, unforgiving wood, polished smooth by generations of nervous hands, each indentation holding a phantom echo of despair. The witness stand, raised slightly, felt like a pedestal for public scrutiny, a spotlight for condemnation. The judge's bench, however, was a fortress, a dark mahogany edifice that ascended several steps, placing its occupant physically above all others, a throne of unquestionable power. It was cold, powerful, and utterly alien to Finn, a symbol of the very system that had relentlessly conspired against him. He sat on a hard bench, his small frame almost lost beside his public defender, a young woman with tired eyes who had barely introduced herself, her voice a monotone of practiced indifference. She mumbled something about standard procedure and plea bargains, words that meant nothing to him, empty promises in a language he didn't understand. He just wanted to go home, to Elara, to the only solace he had ever known. The thought of her, alone and coughing, twisting in their dilapidated trailer, twisted his stomach with a sharp, sickening ache. He was acutely aware of the hushed whispers of the few people present, Mr. Henderson, smug and self-righteous, sitting beside Sheriff Brody, who leaned back in his chair, a silent victor, a predator basking in his prey's capture. They glanced at Finn, then quickly away, as if his very presence was an affront, a smudge on the pristine canvas of their comfortable lives. Their eyes were daggers, their silence a deeper cut. A door to the side of the judge's bench opened, and a sudden, expectant silence fell over the room, as if the air itself held its breath. Judge Elias Thorne entered. He was a man who commanded respect, not just by his position but by his palpable presence, an aura of quiet, formidable power. His hair, once dark, was now a distinguished silver, neatly combed, a crown of unassailable authority. His robes, dark and flowing, added to his imposing height, transforming him from a man into a symbol of the law's crushing weight. His face was etched with the lines of countless decisions, countless burdens, giving him an aura of both wisdom and weariness, a man who had seen too much and felt too little. He moved with a measured gait, settling into his high-backed chair with an almost imperceptible rustle of fabric, each movement a deliberate assertion of control. He barely looked at Finn at first, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom with a detached professionalism that chilled Finn to the bone, reducing him to an entry on a docket. To him, Finn was just another case file, another statistic, another inconvenience to be processed by the relentless machinery of justice. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, sharp and clear, a command that reverberated through Finn's weary bones. Everyone stood. Finn, still handcuffed, struggled to rise quickly, his movements awkward, clumsy, a public display of his humiliation. "Please be seated," Judge Thorne said, his voice deep, resonant, and carrying the undeniable weight of unquestionable authority, a voice that could crush a man with a single inflection. The proceedings began. Finn's name was called, a strange, unfamiliar sound in this echoing room, stripped of any familial warmth. The charges were read aloud: petty theft, disorderly conduct. Each word felt like a stone being dropped onto his chest, suffocating him, burying him beneath a mountain of lies. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked, his gaze finally settling on Finn, but it was a glance, fleeting and impersonal, not seeing him, just observing a defendant, another cog in the system. "Not guilty, Your Honor," his public defender said quickly, her voice thin, almost an afterthought, a whisper of inadequate defense against a roaring tide of accusation. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man with an aggressive demeanor, began questioning Mr. Henderson. The shop owner recounted his story, embellishing details, painting Finn as a known troublemaker, a habitual scavenger, practically a menace, a threat to the pristine order of Harmony Creek. Finn listened, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together, cold, a desperate attempt to contain the rage simmering within him. It was a lie, all of it. He was a ghost, not a menace, an inconvenient truth, not a malicious one. "And you're certain it was this boy, Mr. Henderson?" the prosecutor asked, gesturing vaguely at Finn as if he were an exhibit, a specimen of the town's unwanted elements. "Who else could it be? He was right there, always is. A real nuisance," Henderson practically spat, his eyes full of indignant self-pity, convinced of his own victimhood, deaf to the true suffering he inflicted. The public defender's cross-examination was weak, almost anemic, a pathetic whimper against the prosecutor's bluster. She asked a few perfunctory questions, barely challenging Henderson's narrative, her lack of conviction a heavy weight around Finn's throat. Finn felt a surge of despair. She wasn't fighting for him. No one was. The system was designed to protect itself, to churn through the vulnerable, and he was merely another input. Judge Thorne, his expression unreadable, then asked his own questions, his voice calm but imbued with a quiet power, a measured authority that cut through the courtroom's stifling air. "Sheriff Brody, was the phone recovered?" "No, Your Honor. Not on the boy, not anywhere in the alley," Brody admitted, a slight hesitation in his voice, a flicker of discomfort at the directness of the inquiry. "Any security footage from the store, Mr. Henderson?" The judge continued, his eyes now fixed on the shop owner, a gaze that seemed to strip away the man's smug veneer. Henderson squirmed, visibly uneasy. "Well, the camera out back hasn't been working for a while, Your Honor. We've been meaning to fix it." His words were flimsy, transparent. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed the judge's face, a hint of something unrevealed. "So no footage, no phone found. No real witness placing the phone in the boy's possession, only proximity." It wasn't an accusation, just a restatement of facts, delivered with a detached clarity that seemed to strip away the prosecutor's bluster, exposing the flimsy foundations of their case. "Sheriff, are there any other witnesses to the alleged theft?" "No, Your Honor," Brody replied, his shoulders slumping slightly, the weight of the judge's scrutiny heavy upon him. "Just Mr. Henderson." The air in the courtroom shifted. The initial confidence of the prosecution seemed to waver, replaced by a nascent unease. The judge's questions, precise and pointed, began to peel back the layers of assumption and convenience that had led to Finn's arrest, revealing the insidious prejudice beneath. Finn looked at the judge, a tiny spark of something akin to hope igniting in his chest, a fragile ember in the cold desolation. Was he actually listening? Could he see past the garbage kid label, past the narrative meticulously crafted by the town? The tension in the room thickened, a palpable current running between authority and truth, between assumption and justice, a silent battle being waged. The cold, impersonal courtroom suddenly felt charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to crack, waiting for a revelation. Finn held his breath too, a desperate prayer forming in his silent heart, a desperate plea for recognition, for fairness in a world that had denied him both. He felt the unseen forces shift, the subtle currents of power beginning to turn. Judge Thorne leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom again, this time lingering a moment longer on Finn. The boy, small and pale, sat with a quiet dignity that belied his circumstances. There was no defiance in his eyes, only a deep, weary sadness and a raw vulnerability that tugged at something deep within the judge, stirring a long-dormant chord. He had seen thousands of defendants, hardened criminals, defiant teenagers, scared innocents. But there was something about this boy, this garbage kid, that felt different, a silent echo of a pain he knew too well. The impersonal case file suddenly seemed insufficient, inadequate to contain the story it purported to represent. Fate has a cruel way of giving us exactly what we need at the moment we least expect it. And for Judge Thorne, a truth he had long buried, a carefully constructed illusion of a forgotten past, was about to surface, unwelcome and shattering, threatening to expose the very foundations of his carefully ordered life. The universe, in its own brutal way, was demanding accountability. "Finn," the judge said, his voice softer now, less formal, more inquisitive, a subtle shift that caught everyone by surprise. "How old are you?" 12, Your Honor," Finn replied, his voice still small but clear, a fragile bell in the sudden quiet. "And you live with your mother?" "Yes, sir." "What's her name?" The question was simple, innocuous, part of routine background checks. But as Finn spoke the name, a cold dread seized Judge Thorne, tightening its icy grip around his heart. "Elara, Elara Vance." The judge froze, just for a second, an almost imperceptible twitch in his jaw, a momentary widening of his eyes before he quickly regained his composure, pulling his professional mask back into place. But internally, his world tilted on its axis, the ground beneath him crumbling. Elara Vance. The name hit him like a physical blow, a ghost from a past he had meticulously, painfully walled off, a past he had believed safely buried beneath layers of ambition and self-deception. The scent of old wood and dust in the courtroom suddenly seemed to swirl with the ghost of a different scent. Wild honeysuckle and damp earth after a summer rain, a memory sharp and vivid, piercing through the carefully constructed barrier of his life. His composure cracked, not outwardly but deep within, a fissure appearing in the very foundation of his carefully maintained identity, threatening to bring it all down. He picked up a pen, twirled it between his fingers, a silent, unconscious gesture to steady himself, to rein in the storm brewing within. His eyes, now colder, sharper, returned to Sheriff Brody, the professional mask firmly back in place, but beneath it a tempest raged. "Sheriff Brody," Judge Thorne's voice was low, almost a growl stripped of its previous detached formality, imbued with a nascent fury. "You testified that the boy was found lurking. What exactly constitutes lurking in your professional opinion when the individual states he was searching for food in public refuse?" The question hung in the air, a steel trap waiting to snap shut. Brody visibly stiffened, sweat beading on his brow. "Well, Your Honor, he's known to be around. Not from a good family, if you know what I mean. Always scrounging." His words dripped with the casual prejudice of the small town, the unspoken rules that governed its social hierarchy. "I do not know what you mean, Sheriff," the judge interrupted, his voice cutting like a razor slicing through Brody's assumptions. "I mean facts, not assumptions, not neighborhood gossip, and certainly not class prejudice. Was a crime witnessed? Was there any direct evidence presented beyond Mr. Henderson's admittedly self-serving accusation and a broken camera?" The questions hammered, relentless, exposing the flimsy framework of the accusation. The sheriff's face reddened, his bravado rapidly deflating. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we work with what we have. It's an open and shut case, seems to me. The kid's got a history, no fixed address, no reputable guardian." He clung to his preconceived notions, unable to see beyond the established narrative. "His mother is his guardian," Judge Thorne retorted, his gaze burning into the sheriff, a silent inferno of righteous anger. "And last I checked, poverty is not a crime in this state. Lack of a reputable guardian does not equate to criminal behavior. You arrested a 12-year-old boy without a shred of physical evidence, based solely on a shop owner's assertion and your own biases, correct?" Each word was a hammer blow, shattering Brody's composure. The sheriff swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his brow, his uniform now feeling impossibly tight. "He was the only one there, Your Honor. Proximity is not proof, Sheriff." The judge's voice was a steel trap, snapping shut on Brody's defense. "Tell me, how thorough was your investigation into Mr. Henderson's claims? Did you check his store's inventory logs? Did you interview any other early morning customers? Did you, for instance, consider the possibility that a new smartphone might have simply been misplaced, or perhaps never lost at all?" The implication hung heavy, a question that hinted at deeper conspiracy, at the deliberate manipulation of events. Brody stammered, "Well, we took his word for it, Your Honor. He's a respected business owner." "Respect, Sheriff, does not automatically confer infallibility or truthfulness," Judge Thorne said, his voice now dangerously quiet, the calm before a storm. "And justice, in this court, is not granted based on the respectability of the accuser, but on the validity of the evidence." Finn watched, mesmerized, as the judge, once a figure of cold indifference, transformed into an advocate, a force of nature, driven by reasons Finn couldn't possibly comprehend. The room was silent, the air crackling with an almost unbearable tension. The truth, buried deep beneath layers of convenience and prejudice, was finally starting to breathe, exhaling unease into every corner of the courtroom, exposing the insidious undercurrents of Harmony Creek. Judge Thorne, shaken by a past he couldn't outrun, was now questioning everything, not just for the sake of justice, but for reasons Finn couldn't possibly comprehend, reasons that promised to rewrite his very existence. Just as Judge Thorne prepared to press Sheriff Brody further, to dismantle the edifice of his casual corruption, a faint, unsettling wail began to penetrate the thick walls of the courthouse. Ambulance sirens, distant at first, then growing steadily louder, closer, tearing through the quiet afternoon air, a brutal intrusion of the outside world into the judicial sanctity. All eyes instinctively turned towards the large, arched windows of the courtroom, though nothing could be seen but the hazy sky, a canvas of indifferent blue. A ripple of unease spread through the small gathering, a collective premonition of unforeseen crisis. It was an intrusion, a jarring reminder of the outside world, a world of emergencies and sudden crises, of lives teetering on the brink. The siren reached a crescendo just outside, then abruptly cut off, leaving an echoing silence in its wake, a void filled with an unbearable tension. Moments later, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom slowly creaked open, each groan a prelude to revelation. Everyone turned. Framed in the doorway, supported by two paramedics, was a woman. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her lips tinged blue, a living testament to profound suffering. A thin, threadbare shawl was clutched around her shoulders, barely concealing the trembling that racked her body, a fragile shield against the world's cruelties. Her eyes, however, burned with a fierce, almost desperate intensity, scanning the room, searching, a silent plea in their depths. It was Elara, Finn's mother. The truth of her presence here, amidst the sterile drama of the court, was a punch to Finn's gut. Finn gasped, a sound barely audible, but it tore through the tense silence of the courtroom, a raw, primal cry. His heart leaped into his throat, lodging there, a frantic drumbeat of terror and love. He started to rise, but his public defender gently pushed him back down, whispering, "Stay calm," her voice a meaningless drone against the roaring chaos in his mind. Elara's gaze, weak but unwavering, found Finn. A sudden, potent shock pulsed through the room, a collective understanding that this was no ordinary arrival, no mere witness summoned to testify. The paramedics had clearly brought her directly from home, or worse, from the brink, from the very precipice of life. The smell of antiseptic, faint but distinct, drifted in with her, a chilling harbinger of her fragile mortality. As her eyes met Finn's, a profound silence descended, heavier than any before. All the ambient sounds of the courthouse, the nervous coughs, the rustle of papers seemed to vanish, swallowed by the monumental moment. In that shared gaze, a lifetime of unspoken love, sacrifice, and desperate clinging to life was laid bare. Finn saw her fear, her exhaustion, but also her unwavering resolve, her fierce maternal will to protect him. Elara saw her son, handcuffed, vulnerable, yet standing tall in the face of judgment, a mirror of her own indomitable spirit. Then Elara's eyes drifted past Finn, past the public defender, past the prosecutor and Mr. Henderson. Her gaze lifted to the elevated bench, to the silver-haired man in the dark robes, Judge Elias Thorne. The world stopped. The breath caught in every throat. A collective gasp, soft yet powerful, rippled through the courtroom. Recognition. Not just from Elara, but from the judge. His face, which had been a mask of professional concern just moments before, now drained of all color, a canvas of profound shock. The pen he had been holding clattered to the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the absolute stillness, punctuating the gravity of the moment. His jaw clenched, his eyes wide, mirroring Elara's, reflecting a shared, unbearable history. It wasn't a question that passed between them. It was a statement, a silent, undeniable declaration that shattered years of carefully constructed walls, a truth so profound it reverberated through every soul in the room. This was not just a case. This was not just a boy accused of stealing a phone. This was a convergence of past and present, a secret ripped from the depths of memory and thrust into the harsh light of the present, threatening to unravel everything. The very foundations of Judge Thorne's life, of Harmony Creek's carefully maintained facade, trembled. Sheriff Brody, Mr. Henderson, the prosecutor, Finn's public defender, everyone present felt the shift, the sudden, seismic jolt. The air became thick with unspoken history, with the crushing weight of something monumental and deeply personal. The system, so adept at depersonalizing, at reducing lives to paperwork, was suddenly confronted with a raw, undeniable human truth that defied categorization. Elara, sick and frail, yet radiating an unexpected strength, had arrived not just as a witness, but as a catalyst, an agent of destiny. The truth, long buried, could not stay hidden forever. It had found its way into this small, unassuming courtroom, carried on the faint scent of illness and the fierce, unyielding love of a mother for her son. Finn, bewildered, looked from his mother to the judge, then back again, a growing unease chilling his blood. He had seen the look of recognition, the silent connection. A new, terrifying thought began to form in his mind, a possibility so immense it threatened to swallow him whole, revealing the intricate, conspiratorial threads that bound their fates. The silence stretched, agonizing and profound, like a taut wire humming with an unbearable tension, threatening to snap. Elara, supported by the paramedics, her gaze locked with Judge Thorne's, was a living embodiment of a past that had just violently collided with the present. The judge, usually a pillar of unshakable authority, now sat rigid, his knuckles white against the dark wood of his bench, a man suddenly stripped bare. His breath was shallow, his eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, clouded with a profound, almost desperate realization, the weight of a lifetime of regret settling upon him. Then a paramedic, oblivious to the unspoken drama unfolding, whispered, "Ma'am, you need to sit down. Your blood pressure is dropping." Elara shook her head, her eyes never leaving the judge. "Elias," she croaked, her voice weak but clear enough to cut through the silence like a knife, a name that carried a universe of history. The use of his first name by this woman in this public space was another shockwave. Judge Thorne winced, a brief, involuntary flinch as if struck. He looked at Finn, then at Elara, the pieces of a fragmented life slotting together with horrifying clarity. The boy's intense gaze, the dark hair, the set of his jaw, and Elara, older, ravaged by illness, but unmistakably the woman he had loved, left behind and desperately tried to forget. The threads of his past, meticulously severed, were now violently rewoven into the fabric of his present. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and strained, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Sheriff Brody," he commanded, his voice trembling slightly but firm, steeling himself against the personal maelstrom. "Release Finn Vance immediately." Brody blinked, clearly startled, his small mind struggling to comprehend the sudden shift. "Your Honor, but the charges." "The charges are dropped," Judge Thorne stated, his voice gaining strength, steel replacing the earlier tremor, an absolute decree. "This case is dismissed, and I want a full, detailed report on the specifics of this arrest, every single detail." His eyes narrowed, burning into the sheriff, a silent threat. "I want to know why a child was arrested on such flimsy, unsubstantiated claims. I want to know why procedure was ignored. And I want to know why bias was allowed to supersede justice in my courtroom." The implicit conspiracy of convenience and prejudice was being systematically dismantled. Sheriff Brody's face went pale. He knew a career-ending moment when he saw one. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked Finn's handcuffs. The metallic click, once a symbol of his imprisonment, now heralded an unexpected liberation, a brittle sound of freedom. Finn rubbed his wrists, bewildered. He was free. But the reason for his freedom, the seismic shift in the judge's demeanor, remained a terrifying mystery, a new and unsettling truth. Judge Thorne then turned his gaze to Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, I suggest you conduct a thorough search for your missing phone, and perhaps consider installing functional security cameras. Your testimony, under oath, regarding Finn Vance's alleged known troublemaker status and the lack of working cameras will be re-evaluated. Perjury is a serious offense." Henderson slumped in his seat, his smugness completely evaporated, replaced by palpable fear, the architect of his own downfall. "Elias," Elara whispered again, a faint smile touching her lips, a mixture of triumph and profound sorrow, a testament to long-suffering endurance. The judge stood, his robes rustling around him. He descended from the bench, a move unprecedented, almost sacrilegious in its breaking of court protocol, a symbolic descent from his pedestal of power. He walked towards Elara, slowly, deliberately, as if crossing an immense chasm of time and regret, each step laden with unspoken history. He stopped before her, his gaze holding hers, a silent communion of two souls bound by destiny and a shared, agonizing past. "Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, raw with a pain he had carried for too long, a confession of years of silent suffering. His eyes fell to Finn, who was now standing, looking from his mother to the judge, a silent question in his young, intelligent eyes, hungry for answers. "This boy," Judge Thorne said, his voice now addressing the entire, stunned courtroom, though his eyes never left Finn. "This boy, Finn Vance, is my son." The words hung in the air, echoing with the force of an earthquake, shattering the very foundations of Harmony Creek's carefully constructed illusions. A collective gasp, louder this time, filled the room. The truth, raw and devastating, had been revealed. The respected, feared Judge Elias Thorne, a pillar of the community, had a son he had never acknowledged. A son raised in destitution, abandoned by silence, not by malicious intent, but by a past he had chosen to bury, to deny, to forget. The world suddenly made sense, yet simultaneously fractured into a million pieces for Finn. The judge, his father, the man who sat in judgment over him, the man who had just freed him, was the very source of his existence and his abandonment. The raw, guttural gasp that escaped Finn's lips was laced with a complex mix of shock, betrayal, and a desperate, impossible hope. A new path opening amidst the rubble of his old life. Judge Thorne cleared the charges immediately, not just because Finn was his son, but because the arrest was a travesty of justice, an affront to everything he, as a man of the law, was supposed to uphold. Sheriff Brody was exposed for abuse of power, for dereliction of duty, for allowing prejudice to guide his actions, for becoming a pawn in a larger, unseen game of social control. The system, in its rigid adherence to rules and its blindness to individual lives, had almost devoured an innocent. But for once, it had been forced to look, forced to see, forced to confront the truth hidden in plain sight, a truth that exposed the insidious conspiracy of convenience that governed Harmony Creek. A release, potent and overwhelming, swept through the room, but it was a release tinged with the profound sorrow of a truth too long denied. Justice, the judge knew, had to start with accountability, beginning most painfully with his own. And in Finn's haunted eyes, Elias Thorne saw not just a victim, but a burgeoning force, a young man who, if properly guided, could dismantle the very structures that had brought them to this precipice. The aftermath in Harmony Creek was a slow, churning storm, an upheaval that ripped through the placid surface of the town. The initial shock gave way to a maelstrom of gossip, outrage, and reluctant introspection, forcing the community to confront its own silent complicity. Sheriff Brody was immediately suspended, pending a full internal investigation. His badge, once a symbol of unchallenged authority, now felt like a lead weight dragging him into disgrace. The charges against Finn were formally expunged from all records, wiped clean as if they had never existed. But the stain of public humiliation clung to Brody like cheap cologne, visible and offensive, a permanent mark on his reputation. The system, once thought impervious, was forced to look at itself, its flaws laid bare for all to see, its unseen machinations exposed. Local news outlets, usually focused on high school football scores and bake sales, quickly picked up the story, splashing headlines about judicial paternity and systemic corruption across their front pages. The entire community, a small, insulated world, was rocked to its core, its carefully constructed illusions shattered. Judge Thorne did not celebrate. There was no triumph, no victory lap. Instead, he carried the crushing weight of guilt, a burden far heavier than any he had imposed on a defendant, a self-inflicted penance. The revelation of Finn as his son wasn't a moment of joy, but one of profound, agonizing regret, a delayed reckoning. He had seen the boy's chapped hands, the threadbare clothes, the quiet, haunted eyes. He had seen the proof of Elara's suffering, a life of struggle he had unknowingly, yet actively, perpetuated by his absence, by his cowardice. Every moment of Finn's silent foraging, every cough from Elara, every indignity they had endured, was a fresh stab of pain for him, tearing at the meticulously constructed facade of his detached life. His power, once a source of pride, now felt like a hollow mockery of responsibility, a bitter irony. How could he dispense justice when he had so grievously failed in his own life? He knew, with a chilling clarity, that the unseen currents of fate had simply brought him to account. The initial shock of the courtroom drama quickly transformed into a bureaucratic nightmare for the sheriff's department, a cascade of dominoes falling. Brody's flimsy report was torn apart by state investigators. His history of overlooking the needs of the town's less fortunate, his quickness to blame the marginalized, all came under intense scrutiny. The internal investigation quickly found numerous instances of procedural negligence, racial profiling, and outright abuse of power. The county attorney's office announced that several other cases Brody had handled, particularly those involving the poor or transient, would be reopened for review. It was a domino effect, the truth of one unjust act exposing a cascade of others, forcing the system to confront its own long-ignored shadows, the insidious conspiracies of indifference and privilege that had festered in Harmony Creek for decades. For Finn, the days that followed were a blur of new faces, new questions, and an overwhelming sense of unreality. The public defender, her earlier apathy replaced by a fervent desire for redemption, became a fierce advocate, ensuring all his rights were protected. Social workers who had never paid him any mind were now constantly present, asking gentle questions, offering resources. Elara, still weak but buoyed by a fierce maternal resolve, spoke little, but her eyes held a new, cautious hope, a fragile spark in the lingering shadows of her illness. She allowed Judge Thorne, Elias, to visit, though their conversations were always quiet, strained, filled with unspoken histories, a chasm of years between them. The small trailer, once their sanctuary, now felt inadequate, a stark reminder of their years of struggle, a monument to their past suffering. Elias immediately arranged for Elara to be moved to the best hospital in the region, ensuring she received the intensive medical care she desperately needed. The financial burden, a monstrous weight that had crushed Finn and Elara for so long, was simply lifted, dissolved by the sheer force of Thorne's resources. It was a strange, disorienting experience for Finn to have money, resources, medical attention suddenly appear not through his own labor or sacrifice, but through the belated recognition of a powerful man. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, but also a lingering resentment, a burning question that gnawed at him. Where had this help been all those years? Why did it take such a public spectacle, such a dramatic revelation, for them to be seen, for the system to finally acknowledge their existence? The ease with which Thorne could rectify decades of suffering only emphasized the deliberate nature of their past neglect. The judge spent long nights in his study, the faint glow of his desk lamp reflecting off old law books, wrestling with his conscience, a battlefield within him. The comfortable life he had built, the respected position he held, felt tainted, hollowed out by his own moral failings. His carefully constructed walls of detachment, built after a painful past, had crumbled, revealing the raw, unaddressed wounds beneath, the festering scars of his abandonment. He knew his guilt was not something that could be dismissed by a court order. It was a moral weight he would carry, a silent penance for the life he had denied his son, and the suffering he had allowed Elara to endure. Power, he now understood with a harrowing clarity, came with immense, inescapable responsibility, not just to the law, but to the people whose lives it touched, and most painfully, to the lives it created. He was now forced to confront the unseen consequences of his own choices, the intricate web of destiny he had helped weave. Yet, even amidst the newfound comfort, the image of the Vance homestead burned in Finn's mind, fueled by Elara's quiet whispers during her recovery. 100 years, she'd said, their roots in that land ran deeper than any Harmony Creek gossip. But it had been lost, swallowed by something called Silver Creek Holdings, a corporate entity Finn now vaguely recognized from the edges of his mother's hushed laments. A shadowy figure named Silas Blackwood, the architect of countless small-town land acquisitions, had been the one who'd finalized the foreclosure, turning their legacy into nothing more than a statistic on a ledger. This wasn't just about poverty, it was about theft, about a systemic dispossession. Finn knew then that merely being saved wasn't enough. He had to understand the machinery of their ruin, the precise mechanics of how a family legacy could be so meticulously stripped away, so that he could, one day, dismantle it. This burning resolve, forged in the fires of humiliation and a mother's pain, was his true radical decision. He would master their system, not just for survival but for reclamation. The quiet, understated beauty of the Montana landscape, a harsh and unforgiving land that shaped its people with grit and resilience, was the backdrop for a new kind of redemption. This wasn't a story for speeches or grand media shows, not for public declarations or tearful reconciliations. This was a Yellowstone tone, stark and honest, where actions spoke louder than any words, and forgiveness was a mountain that had to be climbed, not simply offered. Finn, now living in a small, rented house near Harmony Creek, felt the weight of the land, the whisper of the wind carrying the untold stories of generations, the legacy that had been ripped from their grasp. Elara's health, with access to proper medical care, began a slow, agonizing upward climb. Days bled into weeks in the sterile environment of the hospital, each new breath a small victory. Finn spent hours by her bedside, reading from the bent, water-stained book he had saved from the trash. The stories, simple tales of courage and kindness, took on a new resonance, each word a fragile shield against the harsh realities of their past. Elias, his father, was a silent, consistent presence. He didn't hover, didn't make grand pronouncements. He simply was there, a steady, unyielding anchor in Finn's turbulent world. He arranged for the trailer to be moved, not out of town, but to a quiet tree-lined plot near a small, well-regarded school, a subtle statement of their newfound stability. School enrollment. It was a simple phrase, yet it meant a world of difference. Finn, who had only known the chaotic education of the streets and the quiet lessons of survival, was now given a uniform, books, a backpack that wasn't salvaged from the trash. His first day was a blur of unfamiliar faces and strange routines, a dizzying immersion into a world he barely knew. He was quiet, still, observing everything with the intense, watchful gaze of a boy who had learned to read the world in shadows and unspoken cues, in the subtle shifts of power and privilege. He didn't make friends immediately. He didn't expect to. He was the garbage kid no longer, but the label of the judge's son carried its own weight, its own brand of unwelcome attention, a new kind of invisibility. He was an anomaly, a story whispered behind cupped hands. Elias understood this. He didn't push. He offered quiet presence. He drove Finn to school, picked him up, never asking too many questions, just letting him be, allowing him the space to process his fractured world. He bought groceries, not the cast-offs, but fresh, wholesome food, filling the refrigerator in their new, small house. He ensured Elara had everything she needed, a quiet, almost invisible force providing stability and security. There were no emotional outbursts, no sudden dramatic apologies from the judge. His penance was in these actions, a steady, unwavering commitment to rectifying the past, one deliberate step at a time. He learned about Finn's love for reading, for the way he absorbed stories, and began bringing him new books, not just textbooks but novels, histories, and even books on astronomy, observing the quiet spark in Finn's eyes as he received them. He was beginning to understand his son, not as a reflection of his guilt, but as a unique, intelligent individual. Finn didn't forgive instantly. How could he? Years of invisibility, of hunger, of the relentless worry for his mother couldn't be erased by a few weeks of comfort, by the sudden appearance of a father he had never known. The betrayal, the ache of a missing father, ran deep, a wound that festered beneath the surface of his new life. And Elias didn't expect it. He knew forgiveness was earned, not declared. It was a journey, not a destination, a slow, arduous climb. He saw the guardedness in Finn's eyes, the occasional flicker of resentment, and he accepted it, acknowledging the validity of Finn's pain. He was learning slowly, painfully, how to be a father. He learned that love, true love, was not about grand gestures or eloquent speeches, but about quiet presence, consistent action, and the unwavering commitment to simply be there, to offer a stable hand in a world that had once been chaos. Elias, in his own way, was learning to master the system of fatherhood, just as Finn was learning the system of power. Finn, meanwhile, was not merely existing. His mind, sharpened by years of observing the brutal efficiency of Harmony Creek's underbelly, now devoured the resources Elias provided. He read everything, not just the novels, but the dry law texts, the local county histories, the obscure journals on agricultural economics Elias subtly placed on his desk. He began to understand how the Vance homestead, their family farm, a century-old beacon of resilience, had truly been lost. It wasn't just a bad season or unlucky timing. It was a meticulously orchestrated financial squeeze, a predatory loan from a nascent company named Silver Creek Holdings, fronted by the smooth, ruthless Silas Blackwood, who understood the intricate dance of land, debt, and desperation. Blackwood was not just a businessman. He was an architect of ruin, transforming honest toil into corporate profit. Finn saw the subtle, conspiratorial threads connecting every small injustice to a larger, systemic web. The same system that had branded him garbage kid had devoured his family's legacy. He studied property records, water rights, zoning laws, piecing together the invisible architecture of power that governed Harmony Creek. Elias, observing Finn's intense focus, subtly offered more specific texts, guiding his son's prodigious intellect without truly knowing the depth of Finn's burgeoning resolve. He was becoming a scholar of the shadow economy, learning the rules to eventually break them, or more accurately, to bend them to his own righteous will. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after the courtroom drama, Finn was sitting on the porch of their new house, a thick book on environmental law open on his lap, but his gaze was fixed on the distant mountains, their peaks now dusted with the first snow. He heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. Elias stepped out of his car carrying a bag of groceries. Their eyes met. There was still a chasm between them, a silent history of pain and abandonment. But in that moment, something shifted. A faint, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a tacit understanding that transcended words. A restrained hope, fragile yet persistent, began to bloom in the cold, clear air. Redemption, Finn understood, was a seed planted in hard ground, watered with silent effort, and harvested not in declaration, but in the slow, painstaking growth of trust and in the strategic accumulation of knowledge. He was not just a recipient of kindness. He was an architect of his own future, armed with a growing understanding of the vast, unseen forces that shaped his world. And now, he was ready to face them. He saw Harmony Creek differently now. No longer a collection of indifferent storefronts, but a chessboard where powerful, unseen players moved pieces of land, livelihoods, and lives with chilling precision. Silas Blackwood, the shadow behind Silver Creek Holdings, was the grandmaster. Finn had devoured every public record, every hushed rumor, piecing together the insidious rise of Blackwood's empire. He learned how Silver Creek had systematically acquired prime agricultural land, often through predatory loans and foreclosures, transforming independent farmers into tenant workers, or driving them off their ancestral lands entirely. The Vance homestead, Elara's family farm, was just one casualty in Blackwood's calculated expansion, a testament to his ruthless efficiency. Blackwood operated within the letter of the law, but his spirit was that of a predator, exploiting every loophole, every vulnerability. Finn's understanding of him grew from a vague fear to a precise, intellectual blueprint of his enemy. He knew Blackwood didn't just win, he devoured. And Finn, the boy who once scavenged for discarded scraps, was now learning to scavenge for crucial information, for the vulnerabilities in Blackwood's fortress. He knew the fight would not be with fists, but with ledgers, with legal precedents, and with the subtle manipulation of market forces. The whispers in Harmony Creek were not just about Finn and Judge Thorne anymore. They began to carry a new undercurrent of unease, a rising anxiety among the remaining independent farmers. A severe drought, unprecedented in its intensity, gripped the region. The sun, once a harbinger of growth, became a relentless enemy, baking the earth into a cracked, infertile mosaic. As wells ran dry and crops withered, a new kind of crisis began to unfold. Silver Creek Holdings, under Silas Blackwood's chillingly efficient direction, owned the primary water rights to the region's largest underground aquifer. They began systematically restricting water access to smaller farms, citing conservation efforts and optimizing resource allocation, corporate jargon that masked a far darker agenda. Farmers, desperate and with their livelihoods dying in the fields, were suddenly forced to sign oppressive water contracts, effectively mortgaging their future yields to Silver Creek, or sell their land for pennies on the dollar. It was a perfectly legal, perfectly brutal squeeze, a slow, agonizing death for Harmony Creek's agricultural heart. This was Crisis 3. This was Blackwood's game. Finn felt the collective humiliation and injustice keenly. He saw the despair in the eyes of old farmers, men whose hands were calloused from generations of working the land, now forced to sign away their heritage. This wasn't just business. It was theft, a systematic stripping of dignity and legacy. He saw in their plight the echo of his mother's suffering, the very mechanism that had stolen the Vance homestead. Elias, observing the growing unrest, cautioned Finn about Blackwood's power. "He owns half the county, Finn," the judge had said, his voice laced with grim resignation. "He moves quietly, but his shadow reaches everywhere. You can't fight him head-on." But Finn knew better. He had learned in the alleys that the direct path was rarely the intelligent one. He had learned that true power lay in the unseen, in the forgotten corners of the system, in the loopholes Blackwood himself had created. He spent his nights poring over the intricate legal documents Elias had secured for him, tracing the labyrinthine pathways of water rights, land deeds, and corporate structures. He studied hydrological reports, old county maps, anything that could offer an advantage. He saw the vast conspiracy of silence and complicity that allowed Blackwood to operate with impunity. One late evening, a dog-eared, century-old county survey map spread across his desk. A revelation struck Finn, tucked away in a forgotten annex of the old Vance homestead deed. A minor stipulation, overlooked by modern lawyers and ignored by Blackwood's aggressive legal team, indicated an ancestral right-of-way for a small, spring-fed creek that historically flowed directly through a corner of the old Vance property before emptying into the larger river. This creek, now mostly dry due to the drought, was not included in Silver Creek's dominant water rights. Furthermore, a deeper, forgotten clause detailed a collective agreement among the original homesteaders to maintain shared access to this particular spring in times of extreme drought, predating any modern corporate claims. It was a legal relic, a ghost from a past where community meant more than profit. This was Finn's turning point, his innovation. He worked tirelessly, discreetly gathering evidence, contacting the descendants of the other original homesteaders, all small farmers still clinging precariously to their land. Many were skeptical, weary of fighting. But Finn, with his quiet intensity and his carefully articulated legal arguments born from nights of study, slowly convinced them. He showed them the forgotten clause, the obscure maps, the historical precedents. He presented a plan, not to overtly challenge Blackwood, but to reactivate this dormant agreement, to collectively restore the ancient spring and its associated water channels, and claim their historic right to its flow independent of Silver Creek's stranglehold. It was a bold, almost audacious move, a subtle act of subversion that operated entirely within the system Blackwood himself had failed to fully dissect. The farmers pooled their meager resources, Finn leveraging a small amount of the emergency funds Elias had established for Elara, a decision he wrestled with, but justified by the larger legacy at stake. They hired a retired surveyor Finn had befriended, an old man who still remembered the old ways of the land. Under Finn's meticulous guidance, they began the arduous process of clearing brush, digging new channels, and revitalizing the spring. It was slow, back-breaking work, a testament to resilience. When the first trickle of water, clear and cool, finally flowed into the newly dug channels, it was more than just water. It was hope, a tangible victory against the corporate monolith. This was his quantifiable escalation. They had secured enough water to save their most vital crops, to keep their farms breathing, to defy Blackwood's control. Finn had not just survived. He had begun to master the intricate system that sought to crush them, not through overt rebellion but through strategic, almost invisible brilliance. The ripples of this small victory began to spread, carrying whispers of a new kind of power emerging from the shadows of Harmony Creek. Finn's quiet victory was a thorn in Sila's Blackwood's side. It was a minor inconvenience on his grand ledger, but it was an affront to his absolute control. Blackwood, a man accustomed to seamless acquisition and unchallenged dominance, viewed Finn's maneuver as an insolent act of defiance. The trickle of water, a symbol of hope for the farmers, became a venomous drip in Blackwood's calculated world. He dispatched his legal team, initially dismissing it as a simple trespass, a misunderstanding of modern water law. But Finn, prepared, had every historical document, every legal precedent, every collective agreement meticulously organized. Elias, though initially hesitant, now quietly used his connections to ensure Finn's arguments were heard fairly, leveraging his influence to prevent Blackwood from simply crushing the re-established rights through sheer legal muscle. Blackwood, realizing he couldn't easily dismantle the ancestral water rights, shifted tactics. He began a more insidious campaign of economic pressure. Banks, subtly influenced by Silver Creek holdings, suddenly became less willing to offer loans to farmers associated with Finn's cooperative. Suppliers raised prices, citing market fluctuations that seemed curiously selective. Blackwood's operatives began spreading rumors, questioning the viability of the cooperative, suggesting Finn was a troublemaker stirring up needless conflict. The stakes escalated dramatically. Elara, now recovering at home, felt the renewed stress, her cough occasionally returning with a jarring regularity. Elias, seeing the shadow of Blackwood stretching over his son, warned him. Silas doesn't just want to win, Finn. He wants to destroy anything that threatens his vision. He'll hit you where it hurts the most, financially, personally. The air in Harmony Creek grew thick with unseen threats, a palpable tension as the true battle for the land began to brew, threatening to engulf everyone. Finn understood this wasn't just about water. It was about power, about challenging the very architect of their systemic humiliation. He knew he had to strike at the heart of Blackwood's perceived invincibility, or everything he had fought for, everything he had learned, would be swept away. One afternoon, as Finn walked home from school, the familiar Harmony Creek Main Street stretched before him, no longer a mere thoroughfare but a stage for the town's subtle dramas. He saw Mr. Henderson, his frame thinner, his shoulders slumped, sweeping the sidewalk in front of his store. The once bustling general store had suffered. The local scandal, combined with the reopening of past injustices, had tarnished its reputation, and Blackwood's economic pressures, subtly favoring larger chains, had further eroded his business. Most of the townspeople, though still clinging to their prejudices, now saw Henderson not as a victim, but as a catalyst for a shameful truth, a small-minded man in a large web of corruption. Finn walked past, his head held high. He no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt the burning shame. He was seen not as the garbage kid, but as Finn Vance, a boy with a history, yes, but also with a future, a burgeoning force. He heard Mr. Henderson clear his throat, a hesitant, almost pathetic sound. Finn stopped, a slight frown touching his brow, and turned. "Finn," Mr. Henderson said, his voice raspy, devoid of its usual forced cheer, stripped bare of all pretense. His eyes, once filled with accusation, were now clouded with a desperate plea for something Finn couldn't name, perhaps absolution. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything." His words felt like ashes in the crisp air. Finn looked at him, truly looked at him, not with anger but with a detached clarity, a piercing understanding born of his own arduous journey. He remembered the feeling of the cold handcuffs, the judge's initial indifference, the relentless ache of worry for his mother. He remembered the smell of the dumpster, the taste of stale bread, the weight of the town's silent contempt. He remembered the systemic convenience that had allowed Henderson to point fingers, just as Blackwood pointed fingers at entire communities. "You weren't sorry when you saw me in the alley, Mr. Henderson," Finn said, his voice calm, steady, and far too old for a 12-year-old, carrying the gravitas of earned wisdom. "You weren't sorry when Sheriff Brody arrested me without proof. You were just sorry when the truth came out, when it touched your asterisk life." Mr. Henderson flinched, his gaze dropping to the pavement, unable to meet Finn's unwavering stare. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake," he mumbled, a hollow echo of remorse. "A mistake cost my mom years of her life," Finn replied, his voice still even but with an underlying steel that spoke of deep, unhealed wounds, a silent declaration of his suffering. "A mistake put me in handcuffs. A mistake made everyone in this town think I was a thief, because it was easier than facing the truth of why I was there." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the full weight of his words settle between them, each syllable a precise cut. "I'm not asking for your apology, Mr. Henderson. I don't need it. My mom's getting better. I'm going to school. I have a different life now, a life built on fighting the very system that made you and Brody believe you could get away with it." He turned to walk away, but then stopped, a thought forming, a deeper understanding of the hierarchical web of power. He remembered the feeling of powerlessness, the way his future had hinged on the whim of a judge, on the arbitrary nature of whether someone chose to look, or chose to turn a blind eye. He turned back, his gaze now firm, resolute, not just a boy but a burgeoning force. "Do you know why I was saved, Mr. Henderson?" Finn asked, his voice ringing with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. "It wasn't because I was the judge's son. It was because for once someone finally looked and saw, not what they wanted to see, not what was easy, but what was real. And now I'm looking too, not just at you, but at the strings that move everyone in this town, the unseen hands that have taken so much." Mr. Henderson had no reply. He stood there, diminished, humbled, his broom clutched in his hand, a solitary figure dwarfed by the long shadows of the setting sun, a puppet cut from its strings but still unable to see the puppeteer. Finn nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, not of forgiveness, but of an understanding of the man's place in the larger scheme. He then continued down the street, his stride purposeful, leaving Mr. Henderson to the solitary quiet of his ruined reputation, a small collateral damage in a much larger war. The air, crisp and cold, carried the scent of wood smoke and distant pine, a reminder of the unchanging landscape that had witnessed his transformation, and the deeper currents of power that were still in play. He wasn't saved because he was a judge's son. He was saved because, for once, someone finally looked, and in that gaze, Finn had found the resolve to look deeper, to expose the unseen, and to fight for a justice that extended beyond the courtroom. The game had been set for Finn, years in the making, and now the pieces were aligned. Blackwood's renewed economic assault on the cooperative farmers only strengthened Finn's resolve. He saw the pattern, the deliberate strangulation of independent spirit. Elias, observing Finn's unwavering focus, realized his son wasn't just smart. He was exceptionally resilient, embodying a tenacity Elias himself had once possessed. He chose to fully support Finn, not just as a father, but as a legal strategist, offering his formidable knowledge of the law as a shield and a sword. They would use the system against itself. Finn knew Blackwood's power was rooted in land acquisition and debt. The only way to truly challenge him was to unravel the very fabric of his empire, to hit him where it hurt, his financial structure. Finn, through his relentless research, discovered a critical vulnerability. Years ago, When Silver Creek Holdings first acquired the Vance homestead and surrounding lands, Blackwood had structured some of the financing through a complex series of holding companies and offshore accounts, an intricate web designed to minimize taxes and obscure true ownership. One of these lesser-known holding companies held a significant lien on a crucial water purification plant that served Harmony Creek, a plant Blackwood had always intended to fully acquire for a nominal sum once its original bonds matured. It was a backdoor play, a slow-motion corporate grab of essential infrastructure. Finn also uncovered a rarely invoked local ordinance, dating back to the town's founding, that tied the ownership of certain communal infrastructure, like the water plant, to direct community benefit and transparent local oversight. Blackwood, in his arrogance, had dismissed such archaic regulations, but Finn and Elias saw the opening. They quietly worked with the remaining co-op farmers, and even some reluctant town council members who were beginning to chafe under Blackwood's heavy hand, gathering support. Their plan was audacious: acquire the maturing bonds of the water plant through the cooperative's collective and strategically leveraged resources. Then, using the forgotten ordinance, force Silver Creek to either sell its lien at a vastly undervalued price or face a public lawsuit that would expose Blackwood's entire labyrinthine financial structure to scrutiny, risking severe tax fraud and corporate malfeasance charges. The final confrontation was not in a courtroom, but in the sterile, imposing conference room of Blackwood's corporate offices, a glass tower that lorded over Harmony Creek from the outskirts of the nearest city. Finn, now 17, accompanied by a grim-faced Elias and a few stoic farmers, faced Silas Blackwood across a polished mahogany table. Blackwood, a man carved from granite and ambition, radiated an icy contempt. "You're playing with fire, boy," Blackwood sneered, his eyes like chips of flint. "Harmony Creek is my domain, you have nothing." Finn, though his heart hammered, met Blackwood's gaze with the unwavering intensity of a man who had seen true desperation and emerged stronger. "Harmony Creek is not a domain, Mr. Blackwood. It's a community, and you have systematically stripped it bare, using debt as your weapon and our land as your spoils." He laid out their case: the acquired bonds, the forgotten ordinance, the meticulous evidence of Blackwood's financial shell game. "We will not just reclaim the water plant. We will expose every illicit transaction, every predatory loan, every parcel of land you acquired through dubious means. This will be more than a lawsuit, Mr. Blackwood. It will be a public reckoning. Your empire will not just fall, it will unravel in a storm of scandal and prosecution." Blackwood's face, usually impassive, twitched. He saw the cold, calculated truth in Finn's eyes, the legal and financial trap meticulously laid. He saw Elias Thorne, silent but formidable, standing behind his son. He realized the impossible choice: fight and risk public ruin and the collapse of his entire empire, or yield. "What do you want?" Blackwood rasped, defeat bitter in his mouth. "Justice," Finn replied, his voice firm, unwavering. "The Vance homestead returned to my mother unencumbered, fair water rights for all cooperative farmers, and a substantial investment into community-owned agricultural infrastructure, a fund to protect small farmers from predatory practices like yours. Your choice: the quiet dissolution of your local holdings, or a very loud, very public collapse that will haunt your name for generations." The silence that followed was deafening, laden with the weight of Blackwood's shattered power. He knew he was outmaneuvered, outsmarted by a boy he had once dismissed as garbage. Finn watched as the arrogance drained from Blackwood's face, replaced by a chilling fear. The symmetrical catharsis was complete. Blackwood, the ultimate gatekeeper, was defeated, not by brute force, but by the very rules of the system he had twisted to his will, now turned against him. The Vance homestead, a symbol of stolen legacy, would return. And so their destiny was forged, a new legacy built from the ashes of the old. The Vance homestead, fertile and thriving once more, stood as a beacon in Harmony Creek, managed by a burgeoning cooperative that championed sustainable, ethical agriculture. Finn, now a young man in his 20s, was no longer the garbage kid. He was a respected leader, an agro-business visionary who had not merely survived the system, but mastered it, bending its formidable power towards justice and community. He had transformed Harmony Creek, replacing the insidious web of predation with a network of mutual support and shared prosperity. Elara, vibrant and fully recovered, often sat on the porch of the reclaimed homestead watching Finn work, a quiet pride in her eyes. Elias Thorne, having stepped down from the bench, found a new purpose, advising Finn and the cooperative finding redemption in the rebuilding of his son's world. Justice, Finn learned, isn't about vengeance, but about finally being seen, about reclaiming what was stolen, and about holding those in power accountable for the shadows they cast. But as one man breaks the system, another is trapped by it. How many unseen lives are waiting for someone to finally look? If this journey marked your soul, leave a like and subscribe. For the best stories are those that refuse to die in silence.